Flawedcast number 120, Plato's Cave. Those who are able to see beyond the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, let alone believed by the masses. Plato.
Flawedcast. Get in the arena.
Boy, that's a good quote. I like that quote.
That's amazing.
Well, good morning, everyone tuning in. We got Carl back with us. As always, we want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for their continued love and support. Please continue to share our episodes. We are growing. We picked up a bunch of new followers on Parler and Getter this week, so we want to thank them. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are on Parler. We're on Getter. We're on Gab. That's on Flawed Inc. We're anywhere you can listen to podcasts, Flawedcast CLE, Google Play, Spotify, Apple. We're back on Apple. We are on Breaker. We're on Rumble under Flawed Inc. We're back off of YouTube again this week. So
we had 1 week on.
We had 1 week on. Yeah.
It had to be something you said.
I'll definitely take that. Please get a copy of the book, Smith's Heart of Man Repair Manual. Link is below. And if you are so inclined to want a copy and you can't swing it right now, please send us an email, flawedinccle@gmail.com. Be more than happy to send you a PDF. And also, if you have any questions, concerns, show tip, things you'd like us to say, give a shout out, you can email us there as well, flawedinccle@gmail.com. However, I'm going to turn it over to my trusty sidekick, Carl, and I believe I forgot to say good morning, but good morning.
Well, good morning to you, William. You did ignore me.
I'm so sorry. I'm in the zone right now. So.
I have no feelings, so you couldn't hurt them anyway.
Okay, well, there you go. Do you feel like doing up the patriotic 20 seconds?
I do have that feeling.
Okay.
So everyone, take your right hand, place it over your left heart, and repeat after us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, it is time to get in the arena. Actually, I had a real quick shout out to one of our listeners, Steve. He got the new episode and he goes, man, he sent me a message. He goes, I can't wait to get in the arena this weekend and listen to this. So that was pretty awesome. So thank you, brother. Big shout out to Steve. But we're going to talk about something of a more philosophical nature, and occasionally I like to throw these in as an allegory or a thing just to process and perhaps take a look at things a different way than just kind of giving you like straight on news or straight on undiluted, gospel. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but, just want to be more holistic. And we like to do these things like we had an episode a while ago called The 7 Ages of Man, which is based on a William Shakespeare. But nonetheless, I think this is going to be like one of those. And, Socrates and Plato were the two mainstays of philosophy. Plato was Socrates' student.
Yes, he was a student.
He was, which is a sign to us all that even though you're great, you can always learn from somebody. So, or there's always somebody that you could be the best fighter in the world, but there's always somebody that's better. So this is a teachable moment, I think, for us all. But he
was the Mr. Miyagi of his day.
This is true.
And, of course, Plato was Danielson.
Great analogy.
Thank you.
I like that, yes. Well, Carlson, let's get into the idea of Plato's cave. And this is really something that I just in my reading around and digging around, I kind of came across and I thought, wow, this is such a profound thought and analogy. So let me kind of just read a little bit, lay the groundwork, and then Carl had some great observations. He's gonna kind of butt in like he does and like we do, and we're just going to kind of grip and rip it. So the allegory of the cave, or Plato's cave, is an allegory presented by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work Republic to compare the effect of education and the lack of it on our nature. It is written in a dialogue between Plato's brother Glaucon and his mentor Socrates, narrated by the latter. So this is kind of narrated by Socrates or Socrates. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the best I can to read this allegory, this analogy, it can be told and summed up very well, but there's a lot of nuances. So I believe I found a good version, and we're just going to kind of...
If you don't mind, periodically, you could ask Mr. Tuckerson to help you.
Would Mr. Tuckerson like to help?
I'll help you when you get wore out.
Okay.
Turn to me, and I'll be there as your support this time.
I'll be there.
Yes.
So basically, the allegory is about these people that live in a cave, hence Plato's cave. So it says, imprisonment in the cave. Plato begins by having Socrates ask Glaucon to imagine a cave where people have been imprisoned from childhood, but not from birth. Interesting point. These prisoners were chained so that their legs and neck are fixed, forcing them to gaze at the wall in front of them and not to look around at the cave, each other, or themselves. Behind the prisoners is a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners is a raised walkway with a low wall behind which people walk carrying objects or puppets of men and their living things. The people walk behind the walls so their bodies do not cast shadows for the prisoners to see, but the objects they carry do, just as a puppet showman have screens in front of them as when they were puppets. The prisoners cannot see any of what is happening behind them. They are only able to see the shadows cast upon the cave walls in front of them. The sounds of the people talking echo off the walls, and the prisoners believe that the sounds came from the shadows. Socrates suggests that the shadows were reality for the prisoners because they have never seen anything else. They do not realize that what they see are shadows of objects in front of a fire, much less that these objects are inspired by real things outside of the cave, which they do not see. The fire, or human-made light, and the puppets used to make shadows are done by the artist. Plato, however, indicates that the fire is also the political doctrine that is taught in a nation-state. The artists use light and shadows to teach the dominant doctrines in a time and place. Interesting observation. Also, few humans will ever escape the cave. This is not an easy task, and only a true philosopher with decades of preparation would be able to leave the cave. Up the steep incline. Most humans will live at the bottom of the cave, and a small few will be the major artists that project the shadows and the use of human-made light. Carl, would you like to go to the next section?
Sure, I would.
Thank you.
Plato then supposes that when prisoner is freed, the prisoner would look around and see the fire. The light would hurt his eyes and make it difficult for him to see the objects casting the shadows. If he were told that what he is seeing is real instead of the other version of reality he sees on the wall, he would not believe it. In his plan, Plato continues, the freed prisoner would turn away and run back to what he is accustomed to, that is, the shadows of the carried objects. He writes, it would hurt his eyes, and he would escape by turning away to the things which he was able to look at, and these he would believe to be clearer than what he was being shown to him. Plato continues, suppose that someone should drag him by force up the rough ascent, the steep way up, and never stop until he could drag him out into the light of the sun. The prisoner would be angry and in pain, and this would only worsen when the radiant light of the sun overwhelmed his eyes and blinded him. Slowly his eyes adjust to the light of the sun. First, he can see only shadows. Gradually, he can see the reflections of people and things in water. Then the latter see the people and things themselves. Eventually, he is able to look at the stars and moon at night until finally he can look upon the sun itself. Only after he can look straight at the sun is he able to reason about it and what it is. The sun, which occurs near the end of the Republic book.
All right, return to the cave. Plato continues saying that the freed prisoner would think that the world outside the cave was superior to the world he experienced in the cave and attempt to share this with the prisoners remaining in the cave, attempting to bring them into the journey he just endured. He would bless himself for the change and pity the other prisoners, and would want to bring his fellow cave dwellers out of the cave and into the sunlight. The returning prisoner whose eyes have become accustomed to the sunlight would be blind when he re-enters the cave, just as he was when he first experienced the sun. Plato would infer that the returning man's blindness, that the journey out of the cave had harmed him, and they should not undertake a similar journey. Plato concludes that the prisoners, if they were able, would therefore reach out and kill anyone who attempted to drag them out of the cave. So the allegory is that, not from birth, but you spend the most of your life in this matrix, and everything that you know is artificial and created, and then one day you get red-pilled. And you realize that what you see is completely artificial. It's man-made. It's derivative. It is narrated to whomever these puppeteers or whomever this is wants the imprisoned people in the cave to understand and believe. But then when you get exposed to the sun, and they use SUN, but my thought process as I was doing this is, I believe the biggest red pill you can ever have is being exposed to the sun, SON, obviously we're talking about Christ. And this guy sees the sun, and he sees the world, and he sees that everything is authentic, and it is lush, and it's vibrant, and it's living. And he goes back to warn his former fellow prisoners, and they in turn turn on him and kill him and hurt him. And I just think it's such an interesting allegory for where we're at with things right now.
I think it is too, and the reason that it was told at that time period by Plato and Socrates is because of what they were facing. I mean, we act like this is new. And so I keep making reference to the scripture that says in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Well, this is new for us. Like right now, this time period, and where we are in history, and what we're dealing with, what we're facing, what we're seeing, this is new to us. But even in that era, they were aware because they were critical thinkers. High-level thinkers.
Sure.
These were men that didn't accept being told what to believe or what to think, but they thought for themselves. Well, we're also now in a society and time where most people are so much more comfortable being told what to think than they are being told to think. They're also not being taught how to think,
right? How
to evaluate. And so that era had deception, political enslavement, which in the end, if I'm correct, ended up in Socrates' death. And then we come to where we are now. But you could go back in time from that era, and it was like as I was reading and as I was studying about this, I realized that these were two great philosophers. We both know that.
Oh, yeah. All philosophy hinges on either their two points of view in that regard.
Correct.
Yeah.
But the first great philosopher that we can hold to was really Jesus.
I concur.
And people would say he was a teacher. Yeah. He taught with philosophy. He used philosophy. He used parables. He asked several questions, and he already knew the answer to the question. He didn't ask questions for information.
Right.
He asked questions so people would give the answer based on teaching them that they were wrong based on how they were answering.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. He already knew the answer to the question, but he asked it anyway. He used philosophy.
Well, he asked so they would know that they knew the answer.
That is correct.
Yeah. But even, you talk about parables. Yeah, Jesus, I would say his number one teaching method was in parables. And I think this is a perfect example of that. Now, I'm not comparing Socrates or Plato to Christ, but obviously it's an effective teaching.
It was methods.
Yeah.
The method.
Yeah.
When I hear him making reference to the sun, I'm just looking at that and seeing that what he's trying to illustrate is that he's making reference to the light that does away with the darkness of deception.
Right.
So he's making reference to the sun being the light that drives away the darkness, and the darkness is the deception. Am I correct in that?
You're 100% correct. It's almost like you went to college or something. But and I took a lot of philosophy courses in college, and that's a perfect allegory. But it's I have a quote here by Aristotle, another big philosopher. He said, "The high-minded man must care more about the truth than what people think." And the idea of that being in slavery, being in bondage, and then having the opportunity to have freedom, obviously the light being shined upon you. And there's a lot of symbology in that. It not just represents freedom, and it represents illumination. It represents education, which is and learning, which is basically what the allegory that they were talking here is about. But it also, to me, it speaks of being rebirthed. And for him to go back and share the idea of him being reborn and the possibility of, hey, you are living in darkness. You are captive to this. You are not able to free yourself from these chains and these things around your neck and your feet and your hand. And you can have experience with freedom and with the light and be cleansed and be reborn. But the thing here is that some people just, and according to this allegory, more than not, do not wish for that. They wish to stay in darkness. They want to stay ignorant. They want to have a controlled narrative that makes it devoid of thought or ultimately any responsibility there of themselves. And I think that's so powerful for kind of where we're at right now. And even this morning as we... Before you got here, I was listening to this guy who was talking about basically the Great Reset. And then, he basically said that he believes within a handful of years that a third of the earth is going to perish. There's some biblical things that maybe you can draw analogies to, but the larger point that I was thinking with that is that, the new narrative is now going to be this monkeypox that just magically all of a sudden appeared, and then Biden just automatically has millions and millions of doses of that vaccine ready. So if you're living in this cave and you're believing everything you're told and you aren't utilizing your acuity, if you're not calling on God and saying, hey, like what is really happening here? Because deception is running wild in these days. And once again, going back to Matthew 24, where Christ talks about it, that's when be false teachers, false prophets. And we are certainly seeing that. And I want this allegory, and I want people to really think about, if you are enslaved, and if you're being deceived, it's going to be hard to realize on your own if you're being deceived, because deception is pretty deceiving. So
yeah, that's why it's called deception.
Exactly. But it's the idea of like, am I not putting myself in a place where I can analyze things? I can look at things. Okay, this outlet is saying this, but this is outlet, or this person is saying this. So if I'm being a fair-minded person, the truth has to be somewhere in the middle. And my biggest thing with this, and it just rings so true to me, and I'm really wanting to hear what you have to say, but the thing that rings the most true to me with all this is that I think these men spoke about this several millennia ago. Mm-hmm. And this allegory as powerful then, when Plato first wrote it, as it is now. And it goes back to something that you said in a few episodes on Still Your Thunder, but there is nothing new under the sun. And Solomon says that in Ecclesiastes. Everything that's going on in one way, shape, or form has been done before. The only difference is fashion, technology, speed in which information comes and goes. But that same spirit, that same, whether it be the spirit of freedom, or whether it be the truth, or whether it be the spirit of deception and the spirit of bondage, is still at work in the world. It's just, what are you going to choose to digest and throw allegiance behind?
Yeah, it's true. I went on a dive into the scripture this week after I after I started studying this allegory and I realized something. It is really true that there's nothing new under the sun. And I found Jesus dealing with this very topic. He dealt with this. He taught on this. And it's found in John chapter 8. And I would just encourage our listeners, if they are readers of the Bible, to take the time to read this for themselves. But I'm going to glean from it and just kind of narrate it. John chapter 8, the beginning part of that, I'll touch on briefly. But Jesus has an encounter with scribes and Pharisees. Now, for those that may not know what a scribe is, a scribe was given the most the most important responsibility of all religion in reality. That was to handwrite and transcribe the Pentateuch and the law. They literally were responsible for keeping the accuracy of events, God's teaching, prophecy, and basically every concept and aspect of Christianity was placed in the hands of the scribes. So these were extremely important religious figures, okay?
Right.
Then he was dealing with the Pharisees. They were a religious sect that had committed wholeheartedly and dogmatically to the teachings of the Torah, of the Pentateuch, of the Old Testament, okay? They were serving on the Sanhedrin, which was 70 leaders that made up the Jewish ruling class. So these were not Satan worshipers. These were the highest esteemed among the religious sect of that day. And they come to Jesus with a woman that they said they caught committing adultery. And they were there to trap him, according to the beginning of John chapter 8. And when they came to Jesus, I love the way Jesus deals with things, right? I really do. They said to him, "We found this woman in the act of adultery according to the law." Now, mind you, they knew the law. You can't write day in and day out something for years and then decades and not learn what you're writing. And as a Pharisee, you have to be responsible because you're teaching those beneath you or under you. So they knew the law inside and out. And they're trying to tell Jesus what the law is. And it was in the law, the old covenant, that she were to be stoned and put to death. Do you know how Jesus deals with this? I know you do, but
yeah.
He doesn't even acknowledge them. That stood out to me because I never really paid attention to that in the past. But he dismissed them. He disregarded them. He didn't even look up, it says. He just stopped what he was doing and he began to write in the dirt. Now, as he was writing in the dirt, because he disregarded them and he acknowledged them, they again asked that question. What should we do? And it was a trap to get him to answer incorrectly. But rather than answering that, he never speaks. He just writes in the ground. And I'm inclined to believe that when they finally shut up and started looking on the ground at the words that he started to write and just continued to write instead of answer their question, I'm inclined to believe he may have started writing some personal sins with their name at the top of what was committed. And I believe that he probably started to get the most important scribe there, and he wrote his name out, and he probably wrote in the ground the sin that he had committed, that he had covered up and no one knew, and it was done in secret. Because when Jesus finally did speak, he said, you know what, he had been writing in the ground, and he had been exposing some things with these guys. And then he said, now, the one among you without sin, let him cast the first stone. And guess what they did? They dropped their stone. They all dropped their stone. Jesus still didn't look up. He was still writing while he was talking. They all walked away. When he finally did decide to look up, there was only one person in front of him, and it was the woman that had committed adultery. And then he says to the woman, hey, where did your accusers go? While I was writing on the ground, there were all of these people that wanted to kill you. And now, where are they? And she said, they have left. And these were the people that Jesus had to deal with. Okay? And so later we go down, and I just wanted to hit real quick on verse 12. Then I'm just going to spend just a couple of minutes beginning at verse 31. But we had said in this allegory with Plato and Socrates that the sun, or the sunlight, was the light in that era that shined onto darkness, which was deception. Jesus has a different interpretation in verse 12, and he tells these same people that he's dealing with, that he's back and forth, he says, and they said that when Jesus spoke again to the people, Jesus said, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. So Jesus interprets that allegory saying, yeah, in reality, the truth of the matter is I'm the light. And when you walk with me, and you walk in me, and I walk in you, you will never have darkness in your life. You won't have to worry about that deception and that darkness, because I am the light of life. It's amazing how he makes reference to that, isn't it?
The one thing I love about John chapter 8 is after he's like, where's your accusers? I'm like, they're not here.
They're gone. They hightailed it out of here.
Right. And he's like, nor do I accuse you. Go and sin no more.
That's the part right there that moves you to tears.
Yeah, I'm a little choked, because it's like he's shining that light on her and them.
Of course.
And this is how I'm connecting the two. And I want to hear the other part you have to say, but this is how I'm connecting the two, because, they were all sinners, whether they're the hierarchy or the leadership, the pristine of that day, or just someone who was bumping nasties with a married person, or she was married, or whatever it was, and they all were sinners. They were all equal. They were all flawed, if you will. And the one who accepted the light is the one who was able to receive Christ's forgiveness.
Yeah, the others were too religious.
Right.
They were too secure in their religion. But the beauty is that when Jesus said in verse 12, I am the light that shines on darkness. Darkness is the hidden places. It's what you can't see.
The cave.
The cave. Jesus, in verse 2 and 3 of that chapter, had already showed these people how he was the light. He already showed these people that what you did in darkness, I revealed in public. I shined light on your secrets. I wrote in the ground the things that you thought only you did, that you had kept in secret and you had kept in darkness. And then you wanted to bring that woman to me and expose the light upon her darkness and her sin and her shortcomings. But Jesus did in verse 2 what he said he was in verse 12. Isn't it amazing? Jesus did, and then he revealed what he did. He said, I shined light. And I'll bet you, Bill, that some of the same people that were there in verse 12 to hear him talk about how he was the light were also there in verse 2 when Jesus shined light on their darkness. I'll bet you that and the reason is because it was the same group that wanted to kill him. And we're getting ready to get into that.
Right.
We're getting ready to get into the real reason. They didn't just trap Jesus to keep him a slave. They trapped Jesus because they wanted to kill him. And they never trapped him. It was never his time to die did not happen until it was his appointed time. In verse 31, Jesus tells these people, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, saying, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. Who can you say that we shall be set free? And Jesus replied, very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now, a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's descendants, yet you are looking for a way to kill me. He tells them, I know what you're doing. And let me step back just a moment to that previous verse where they had the audacity to either lie or be so deceived. And we come to find out that they weren't lying. It was the way they were thinking. These were the scribes that were responsible to write about Egyptian slavery. They had wrote the history of the 400-year enslavement that they were under to the Egyptians. So that was past tense. Now, in the present time that they're living under Roman occupation. They are slaves to the Romans. But they had the audacity to be so in the dark and so deceived and have their history distorted. Isn't that familiar?
Right.
To have their history to deceive them, that the very guys that were responsible to write the history of them, that knew it inside and out, they knew that they were slaves to the Egyptians for 400 years. They knew that they were slaves present day, but they had the blindness to tell Jesus, we've never been slaves. We're Abraham's children. Abraham is our father. That is not a lie. That is such deception and such power of deception to distort the truth and live an alternative reality. And Jesus was dealing with that. And so then I said, well, that's why I say there's nothing new under the sun. Jesus dealt with that kind of thinking in the same manner we're dealing with it today.
100%. The book of John is my favorite gospel. John chapter 15 is such a powerful chapter. The only chapter in the whole entirety of the Bible that I go back to more often is 1 Corinthians 13. But it's this idea of being so deceived that even your deception is a lie. But you believe it, and you're so deceived that it is your reality.
Yes, you can sit there on Sunday as a scribe, and you can write how Moses rose up in anger and killed an Egyptian because he was beating a Jewish slave.
Right.
Like, that's your job. You did that. You wrote that. You were responsible for that. You know that you were, your history was slavery, but you reject that and believe a lie, so that when you're talking to Jesus, you tell him Abraham is our father and we have never been slaves.
Right.
But how can you be so deceived that the reality that you are in is not your reality? And I thought it was mental. But I now found out through Jesus that it's spiritual. And can I continue?
Please.
And close this thing up?
Let's do it.
Jesus says, I know you, Abraham was your descendants. You are looking for a way to kill a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. Abraham did not do such things. He's saying, your father, the father of the nation, he did not tell you the truth like I am.
Right.
And Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me. For I have come here from God. I have not come on my own, but God sent me. Why is my language not clear to you? Because you are unable to hear what I say. Well, they had ears, like they were discussing back and forth. So again, Jesus is talking about spirituality. This is not a hearing problem. This is not a mental problem. This is a spiritual problem. Like their spiritual ears could not hear. Their spiritual eyes could not see. And he's telling them, yet because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Can any of you prove me guilty of sin? And then he says, if I am telling the truth, why don't you believe me? Jesus is like hammering this to them, right? These religious leaders, and he says, whoever belongs to God hears what God says. The reason you do not hear is that you do not belong to God. And that is the problem. It isn't a political problem. It isn't a racial problem. It isn't a socio-economical problem. It isn't a judge or court problem. The problem is right now with what we are facing, that this is spiritual. And the dividing people up and the canceling people and the woke and the this and the that and the division, that's not the problem. Jesus says that you do not belong to God. The Jews answered him and said, "Are we right in saying that you are a Samaritan and demon-possessed?" And he said, "I am not possessed by demons, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me." Jesus tells them who their real father is here in verse 44, and this is bringing it home. This is closing it out. He said, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning, not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar, and he is the father of all lies." I think right there, Bill, summarizes the darkness. Jesus makes reference to him being the light of life earlier. He now makes reference to Satan being the liar and father of all lies, a murderer. His native tongue is lies. And Jesus is making reference to these religious leaders, these religious espound authority, and telling them that Abraham is not your father. The devil is your father. And this is why you can't comprehend even your own history. This is why you can't even comprehend present time period today, that you're a slave and you're sitting here in darkness because your father is the father of darkness. And that's where we are right now. People will look at everything and break it down into categories, but the truth of the matter is it's spiritual, and that is where we can break free of being deceived, is when we open up and we receive Jesus to light us up from the inside out.
Yeah. There's sort of a ironic symmetry in the regards of them believing that they're doing the right thing, being fully devoted in their life and everything, yet they are actually, in regards to what Jesus himself is saying, they are actually working for who their sworn enemy is, if you will.
You're so right. And it's because the devil is such a deceiver that he will get people to commit to his attributes and to his characteristics so that he bypasses the fact they are really committing to him. So, like, there are people that have some ethics and some morals. Right? They would never, I don't think, outwardly sell out and commit to the devil. So he knows that. So rather than being truthful and being honest, which is what Jesus does, the devil will have people that will commit to his characteristics and his interests and his personalities. And there's pleasure in that. The Bible says that. The Bible says that there is pleasure in sin, but it is for a season. And the people are living in that season. And so as long as they continue to turn their thoughts and their mind and their desires over to the evil that comes from the devil, they would never accept you or I telling them that their spiritual father is Satan. Well, they would never accept that.
They didn't even accept Christ saying that.
Correct.
And
at that moment.
Yeah, right.
So that's where we are right now, is that we are now in this time period really where Jesus was as far as dealing with the same people. Because there's no comfort in religious position. There's no validation, according to Jesus, in religious position or religious authority. The only validation comes through him and him alone.
And certainly there's no eternal security.
None.
The parable with the cave, with Plato's cave, and then regarding what that whole transposition there with Christ and the Pharisees and the Scribes is a great practical example of this philosophical allegory that Plato had disposed, or had told people of
and illustrated.
And to me, I think it's a good place to end. Unless you have anything else.
No, I just think the final thing is it is amazing because in reality, Jesus was trying to free them from the slavery and bondage of sin by his message. And it's funny because the response to that was, and you had said with earlier with our teaching of the cave was that when you try and free the slaves that are in the cave, the prisoners, they wanted to hurt the free man. They wanted to attack the free man. And it's just so weird how, like, even in the cave, the prisoner wanted to attack and to hurt. And even in Jesus' time, the prisoner to sin, the bondage of sin, wanted to hurt and wanted to kill.
Yeah.
It's just, the parallel is so amazing there.
Well, there's no natural cure for supernatural issues. And what I'm understanding is that this deceptive spirit everyone is prey to, and that the only escape or the only remedy of that is the full acceptance and understanding that there is only freedom through Christ. And obviously, that doesn't mean that church attendance or the American gospel, as I like to call it, of today, that there's any kind of eternal security in that. If you have that, but you don't have the redemptive acceptance of Christ's sacrifice on the cross, you are no better off than the scribes or the Pharisees, and you're in that same employ, if you will. Yeah. All right. There you go. Deep dive. Deep thoughts with Bill and Carl. But we want to thank you guys for listening. Please continue to share where anywhere you can listen to podcasts. Flawedcast CLE. We're on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker. You can find us on Rumble under Flawed Inc. Sometimes we're on YouTube. That's on Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're doing well on Getter, doing well on Parler, and we are also on Gab. That's under Flawed Inc. Copy my book. Please purchase. A link is below. Smith's Hardeman Repair Manual. And if you want one, you can't swing one, send us an email at flawedinccle@gmail.com. We'd be more happy to send you that. But that being said, know who is handing you your paychecks, I guess you could say.